Daniel Hayes had always believed that diplomacy was a quiet, careful game. Years of study, negotiations, and crises had taught him that words could be as powerful as weapons, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for the assignment he was about to undertake. The Earth government had chosen him for a mission unlike any other. He was to travel across the stars to meet a species that humans had never interacted with before. The Xylar were mysterious, intelligent, and cautious, and for reasons that were not entirely clear, they had avoided contact with humanity until now. The mission was simple in concept, but dangerous in execution. Negotiate peace. The reality, however, would prove to be far more complex. The briefing room had been tense when Daniel received the instructions. His superiors spoke in clipped tones, emphasizing the importance of this mission. Any mistake could lead to disaster, not just for him personally, but for the entire human race. Daniel listened carefully, taking notes on the Xylar society, their customs, their language, and the small details that could make or break the negotiations. He felt a familiar mix of nervousness and excitement. This was what he had trained for, yet he knew that training could only take him so far. The unknown was always unpredictable. Preparations took weeks. Daniel studied the Xylar culture from every available resource. Their language was complex, full of sounds humans could barely reproduce, and their social customs were unlike anything found on Earth. The Xylar valued respect, patience, and understanding above all else. A diplomat who rushed, spoke carelessly, or showed disrespect could find themselves exiled, or worse. Daniel practiced their greetings, memorized their rituals, and studied the architecture of their homeworld, imagining what it would be like to walk through their cities. Each detail felt small, yet he knew it could have immense importance once he arrived. When the day of departure came, Daniel felt a strange mixture of fear and anticipation. He walked through the spaceport, his uniform crisp, his belongings minimal. The spacecraft that would carry him to the Xylar planet was sleek, designed for long interstellar travel, with advanced life support systems and navigation technology that could handle the unknown dangers of deep space. As the engines roared and the vessel lifted off, Daniel stared out the window, watching Earth shrink into a pale blue dot. He thought about everything he had learned and about the enormous responsibility on his shoulders. The journey through space was long, giving Daniel plenty of time to reflect. He thought about the history of human diplomacy and how fragile peace could be, even on his home planet. Now, he was venturing into a situation where misunderstandings could have consequences on a planetary scale. He reviewed his notes repeatedly, imagining the scenarios he might face. What if the Xylar rejected all attempts at peace? What if they misunderstood his intentions? And then there was the personal challenge. He would be interacting with beings who were completely different from humans, with values, emotions, and ways of thinking he could barely guess. The thought both excited and terrified him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the spacecraft entered the orbit of the Xylar homeworld. The first glimpse of the planet took Daniel's breath away. Unlike anything on Earth, it was covered with towering crystalline structures that shimmered in colors no human eye had names for. Rivers of glowing liquid snaked between the buildings, reflecting the light in ways that seemed almost magical. Strange creatures moved across the land, some flying, some walking, some gliding in ways that seemed impossible. The entire world seemed alive, as if every element, water, stone, air, was infused with intelligence. Daniel felt a mix of awe and nervousness. He was entering a world where the rules were entirely new, and he would need all his skill to navigate them. Upon landing, Daniel was greeted by a small group of Xylar envoys. They moved with precision, their bodies graceful and fluid, their expressions calm and unreadable. Their eyes reflected curiosity, but no immediate judgment. Daniel bowed slightly, following the custom he had memorized, careful not to make any sudden movements that could be misinterpreted. One of the envoys led him through the crystalline city, and Daniel marveled at the architecture. The buildings seemed to grow from the ground itself, organic yet perfectly formed, with corridors that glowed softly and stairways that twisted in ways that made him question physics. Every detail of the city felt designed to inspire respect and caution. At the heart of the city, Daniel met Princess Liara for the first time. She was unlike any royal he had ever encountered, tall, poised, and with eyes that seemed to look beyond the surface of things. She exuded authority without needing to speak. Her movements were measured, her expressions subtle but meaningful. Daniel felt an immediate sense of both intimidation and curiosity. This was a leader who demanded attention, who would test anyone who came before her. He reminded himself that he was there as a diplomat, not a visitor, and straightened his posture. The initial conversation was formal, polite, and carefully structured. Liara spoke in a voice that was calm but firm, and Daniel responded with equal care. They discussed the purpose of his mission, the history of contact between their species, and the hope for lasting peace. Even in these early moments, Daniel noticed that Liara's intelligence was remarkable. She asked questions he had not anticipated, probing not just his knowledge but his reasoning, his ethics, and his understanding of human society. It was clear that she would not accept empty promises or superficial gestures. He would need to be honest, careful, and thoughtful at every step. As the meeting concluded, Daniel was escorted to his quarters, a small, comfortable room overlooking the glowing city below. He sat quietly, reflecting on the day. Everything had gone as planned, and yet nothing felt simple. He was on an alien world, among beings whose logic and emotions were sometimes mysterious. He realized that this mission would test him in ways he had never imagined, not just as a diplomat, but as a person. The responsibility weighed heavily on him, but he also felt a thrill of possibility. Here, in this strange, beautiful world, he had the chance to prevent conflict, to build bridges between species, and perhaps to learn something entirely new about the universe and himself. Daniel knew that the days ahead would be challenging. He would need to navigate complex rituals, cultural expectations, and delicate conversations. Every word, every gesture could have enormous consequences, and at the center of it all was Princess Liara, a figure of authority and wisdom whose respect he would need to earn. The mission that had begun as a task of negotiation was already becoming something deeper, something that would test his skill, patience, and understanding in ways he could not yet imagine. As night fell over the crystalline city, Daniel looked out at the glowing rivers and towering structures. He took a deep breath, reminding himself why he had been chosen for this mission. He was here to negotiate peace, to represent humanity with dignity, and to learn. And somewhere deep inside, he could not ignore a flicker of curiosity, a sense that this mission, this world, might change his life in ways he had never expected. Negotiations began in earnest the following day. Daniel entered the grand hall of the Xylar Palace, a space that seemed to glow from within. The walls were made of crystal that refracted light in hundreds of colors, creating shifting patterns on the floor. The air was cool, scented with the subtle aroma of alien flora, and the silence seemed alive, as if the very walls were listening. Daniel felt both awe and anxiety. This was a place of power and tradition, and he understood that one misstep could unravel everything. Princess Liara received him at the center of the hall. She wore a flowing robe that shimmered like liquid light, and her presence seemed to command the attention of everyone around. Daniel noticed how the Xylar attendants moved in perfect harmony, never speaking but signaling to each other through subtle gestures. The customs were so different from anything he had experienced that he had to concentrate hard to avoid mistakes. Every bow, every word, every gesture had meaning. He reminded himself that understanding their culture was just as important as the words he would speak. The first sessions of negotiation were formal but tense. Daniel presented Earth's proposals for peace and trade agreements, carefully phrasing each sentence to avoid offense. Liara listened attentively, occasionally asking questions that seemed simple but tested deeper knowledge. She asked about human values, about how humans made decisions, and about how they approached conflicts. Daniel realized that the Xylar were not interested merely in treaties. They wanted to understand the intentions, ethics, and character of those they negotiated with. Words alone would not be enough. He would need to show sincerity and integrity. Outside the formal sessions, Daniel began to observe Xylar life more closely. He noticed small rituals that occurred constantly: a subtle bow when entering a room, a delicate arrangement of glowing stones on tables, the soft tones of communication that were as much gesture as speech. He tried to mimic these rituals, sometimes clumsily, but the Xylar envoys corrected him politely. Each correction was a lesson in patience and humility. Daniel realized that diplomacy was not just about speaking. It was about learning, understanding, and earning trust. As the days passed, Daniel spent more time with Princess Liara. Their conversations moved beyond formal topics and into the personal and philosophical. Liara asked him about Earth's history, its successes and failures, its hopes and fears. Daniel found himself answering honestly, realizing that the Xylar valued truth above all. He also asked her questions, trying to understand the Xylar way of life. She explained their social structure, their respect for knowledge, and their commitment to harmony. He learned about their arts, their science, and their philosophies, which were so different from human traditions yet contained wisdom he admired. Gradually, a connection began to form. Daniel admired Liara's intelligence, her patience, and the way she balanced authority with empathy. Liara observed Daniel's sincerity, his willingness to listen, and his respect for their customs. They laughed at minor misunderstandings, shared quiet moments in the palace gardens, and discussed ideas that spanned both their worlds. For Daniel, what began as duty slowly turned into genuine curiosity and admiration. He began to see the Xylar, not as alien in a distant sense, but as beings with thoughts, feelings, and values he could relate to. The palace itself was a marvel that fascinated Daniel daily. Crystal pathways led to floating gardens, where plants glowed softly and moved gently as if breathing. Rivers of liquid light flowed through courtyards, and small creatures of unknown species glided through the air, interacting harmoniously with the environment. The Xylar had designed every part of their world to reflect balance and harmony, teaching Daniel that even in differences there could be beauty. Walking through the palace, he often found himself thinking about how he could bridge the gap between Earth and this extraordinary civilization. One evening, Liara invited him to a private chamber filled with glowing orbs and soft melodic sounds. Here, the conversations became more personal. She asked him about his family, his dreams, and what motivated him to dedicate his life to diplomacy. Daniel shared stories of Earth, of human struggles and triumphs, and of the hope that one day humans could connect with other worlds peacefully. Liara listened carefully, her expression thoughtful. She asked questions that challenged his assumptions, urging him to reflect deeply. Daniel realized that in these discussions he was learning not just about the Xylar but about himself. As trust deepened, Liara introduced Daniel to some of the Xylar traditions that were not part of formal diplomacy. He observed ceremonies that celebrated knowledge, music, and light, and he participated where appropriate. He learned that respect for tradition was as important as negotiation skills. The Xylar valued humility, patience, and attentiveness, and Daniel found himself absorbing these lessons naturally. Each ceremony taught him more about the people he was representing Earth to, and each encounter strengthened the bond between him and Liara. But the connection was not without its challenges. Daniel sometimes struggled with the complexity of their rituals, accidentally breaking minor customs. Each mistake required careful explanation and humility. Liara, however, did not scold him. Instead, she used these moments as teaching opportunities, guiding him gently while observing how he responded. Daniel realized that these interactions were as important as any formal negotiation. They revealed character, resilience, and adaptability. Qualities the Xylar respected as much as intelligence. Over time, Daniel began to understand that his mission was evolving. What started as a duty to negotiate peace was becoming a journey of understanding, trust, and personal growth. He realized that Liara's respect and friendship were crucial to the mission's success. Their relationship became a delicate dance of diplomacy and human connection, where each step had to be measured yet sincere. Daniel found himself thinking not just about treaties and agreements, but about how human and Xylar worlds could truly coexist. One day, as Daniel walked through the floating gardens, he paused to watch Liara interacting with her people. He noticed the way they listened to her, the respect she commanded, and the kindness she showed. He felt a quiet admiration, understanding that leadership and diplomacy were deeply intertwined. He also realized that his personal feelings were changing. What had begun as duty was now influenced by genuine curiosity, admiration, and even affection. Yet he reminded himself that he was first a diplomat, and the mission's success depended on careful balance. By the end of the week, Daniel and Liara had established a rhythm. Formal negotiations were progressing steadily, while personal interactions deepened understanding and trust. Daniel felt increasingly confident, though he knew the challenges ahead would test him further. He had gained insight into the Xylar culture, learned to navigate their customs, and formed a connection with Liara that went beyond politics. For the first time in his career, he felt that diplomacy was more than treaties and agreements. It was about building bridges between hearts, minds, and worlds. As Daniel retired to his quarters that night, he reflected on how quickly everything had changed. He had arrived expecting to negotiate, yet he was learning to understand, adapt, and even care. He realized that the mission's success depended not just on his skills as a diplomat, but on his ability to connect, respect, and learn. And somewhere, quietly, he felt the first stirrings of a connection that might grow into something extraordinary. Something that could change not only the future of interstellar relations, but the course of his own life. As the days went on, Daniel realized that understanding the Xylar culture was far more challenging than he had imagined. Every ritual, every gesture, every word had meaning. Even small mistakes could lead to misunderstanding. One morning, he was invited to a traditional ceremony that was meant to honor knowledge and wisdom. The room was vast, filled with glowing symbols and intricate patterns on the walls, and Xylar citizens moved with precise flowing motions. Daniel followed the guidance of an attendant, bowing and positioning himself exactly as instructed. Yet, despite his best efforts, he misread a subtle signal, stepping slightly out of place. The room fell silent. Daniel's heart pounded. He had learned that the Xylar valued respect and attentiveness above all, and he feared he had failed in his role as a diplomat. Before he could apologize, Princess Liara approached. Her calm presence immediately eased some of his tension. She observed him quietly for a moment, then spoke softly, explaining the custom with patience and clarity. Daniel listened intently, realizing that this moment, though embarrassing, was a learning opportunity. Liara's gentle guidance reminded him that diplomacy required humility, and that mistakes were not fatal if handled with respect and honesty. Despite these small setbacks, the bond between Daniel and Liara grew stronger. They began spending more time together outside the formal negotiations. Liara introduced him to aspects of Xylar daily life that were never seen by outsiders. They visited floating gardens filled with glowing flora, wandered through corridors of crystal that refracted light in beautiful patterns, and observed the Xylar people interacting in ways that blended grace with intelligence. Daniel marveled at how every element of the Xylar world seemed designed to create harmony and understanding. He began to see that diplomacy was not just about treaties, it was about immersing oneself fully in the culture and respecting its people. Yet the deeper Daniel immersed himself, the more complex the situation became. He noticed subtle tensions among the Xylar advisors. Some were skeptical of humans, questioning whether Daniel truly understood their ways. Others were intrigued by him, impressed by his willingness to learn and adapt. Daniel realized that earning Princess Liara's trust was only part of the challenge. He also needed to earn the respect of those around her. Each day required careful observation, patience, and thoughtful action. One wrong word or gesture could create doubt that might undo weeks of progress. There were moments of doubt and loneliness as well. Daniel missed Earth, the familiar landscapes, the sounds, the smells, and even the simplicity of human interaction. Sometimes when he returned to his quarters, he would gaze out at the glowing rivers and crystalline structures and feel a pang of isolation. He was surrounded by beauty and intelligence, yet it was alien and unfamiliar. He realized that understanding a culture was not only a mental exercise but also an emotional journey. He had to let go of assumptions, listen deeply, and be open to new ways of thinking. During one private discussion, Liara asked Daniel a question that unsettled him. She wanted to know how he truly felt about being in her world, about humans and their values, and about the potential for connection between their species. Daniel answered honestly, explaining that he had arrived as a diplomat with a mission, but he had come to respect the Xylar people deeply. He admitted that he felt both awe and fear at the responsibility of representing Earth. Liara listened carefully, nodding, and then shared her own perspective. She explained that trust was built over time, through consistent action, honesty, and respect. Daniel understood that this conversation marked a turning point. Their relationship was moving beyond formalities. It was becoming a genuine connection built on understanding and mutual respect. Even as trust grew, challenges continued to arise. The Xylar had complex rules about alliances, commitments, and personal conduct. During a discussion about potential agreements, Daniel inadvertently suggested a solution that conflicted with a long-standing Xylar custom. The room grew tense and he could sense the disapproval of the advisors. Liara intervened gently, explaining the tradition and why it mattered. Daniel listened carefully, taking mental notes. He realized that diplomacy required more than knowledge of language and protocol. It required insight into values, priorities, and the unspoken rules that guided a society. Each misstep was an opportunity to learn, and each correction reinforced his respect for the Xylar ways. Amid these challenges, moments of shared laughter and curiosity emerged. Daniel and Liara explored the city together, often observing ordinary Xylar life. They watched children learning to balance on floating platforms, listened to musicians who played instruments that emitted light as well as sound, and marveled at scientists conducting experiments with glowing, levitating materials. Daniel began to understand that the Xylar world was not just different. It was a place where knowledge, art, and harmony were intertwined. He shared stories of Earth's own wonders, from natural landscapes to human creativity, and Liara listened with genuine interest. These exchanges helped him see that connection was possible, even across worlds. One particularly challenging day, Daniel was asked to participate in a ritual that was part of the formal peace process. The ceremony required precise timing and careful adherence to tradition. Despite his preparation, he hesitated at one step, uncertain whether he understood the meaning fully. Liara, standing nearby, placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, signaling encouragement rather than judgment. With her guidance, Daniel completed the ritual successfully. The act, though small, strengthened the trust between them. He realized that trust was not built through perfection but through sincerity, humility, and the willingness to learn from mistakes. As the week progressed, Daniel felt a profound shift within himself. He had arrived expecting to negotiate, to represent Earth, and to achieve peace. Yet he was learning that success depended on more than words on paper. It required understanding, empathy, and the ability to navigate the subtleties of another world. He was beginning to feel a personal connection to Liara, a respect that went beyond duty and into admiration for her wisdom, patience, and insight. At the same time, he understood that the mission was far from over. There were still cultural, political, and personal challenges ahead, and he would need all his skill to navigate them. By the end of Part 3, Daniel had grown in ways he could not have anticipated. He had gained insight into Xylar society, learned to navigate complex customs, and established a bond with Princess Liara built on respect and trust. Yet the journey was only beginning. The coming days would test his understanding, his patience, and his ability to balance personal connection with diplomatic duty. Daniel knew that the mission would require courage, intelligence, and an open heart. And deep inside, he sensed that the path ahead might change his life in ways he had never imagined, challenging not only his skills as a diplomat, but his understanding of love, partnership, and the possibility of connection across worlds. The days that followed brought new challenges for Daniel. What had started as careful observation and respectful participation in Xylar culture now became a delicate balance of diplomacy, understanding, and personal judgment. The Xylar society was full of rules that were invisible to outsiders, rituals that seemed minor but carried enormous significance, customs that governed even the smallest actions, and unspoken expectations that could shift the outcome of negotiations in an instant. Daniel realized that even a small misstep could have lasting consequences. One morning, Liara invited Daniel to attend a ceremonial event at the heart of the city. The ceremony was unlike anything Daniel had witnessed before. It was both a celebration and a formal ritual, with music that seemed to resonate in the very air, and lights that danced across the crystalline walls. Xylar citizens moved in precise patterns, each gesture reflecting a meaning he could only begin to understand. Daniel followed closely behind Liara, careful to mirror the movements of those around him. Yet, despite his focus, he felt a rising tension. He knew that one mistake could create a misunderstanding that might disrupt the fragile trust he had worked so hard to build. The ceremony involved a symbolic act that, according to Xylar tradition, was reserved for those who were chosen to be closely bonded to the royal family. Daniel's role was to perform a gesture of respect, something that outsiders rarely attempted. As he approached the ceremonial platform, he hesitated, unsure if he fully understood the significance. Liara glanced at him, her calm presence giving him courage, and he completed the gesture as he had been instructed. A hush fell over the hall. Daniel felt the eyes of every Xylar in the room upon him. He had thought he was merely participating in a diplomatic ritual, but the Xylar leaders whispered among themselves, their expressions unreadable. Liara stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm, and addressed the assembly. Daniel listened, confused at first, then slowly understood. According to their tradition, his participation in the ritual was interpreted as an acceptance of a bond that was traditionally seen as a lifelong commitment to a member of the royal family. Daniel's heart raced. He had not intended to agree to anything beyond diplomacy, yet the Xylar tradition was clear and binding. He tried to explain, to clarify that he had acted out of respect and not intention, but the customs of this society were not flexible. Liara, standing beside him, placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Her eyes held understanding and patience, and yet the gravity of the situation was unmistakable. Daniel realized that his personal feelings and sense of duty were now intertwined with the complexities of Xylar law and tradition. The days that followed were filled with private discussions and careful navigation. Liara and Daniel spoke at length about what had occurred. She explained that the ritual could not be undone, but that it was also an opportunity. To the Xylar, a bond formed through this ceremony was more than obligation. It was a sign of trust, respect, and mutual commitment. Daniel listened, understanding the depth of their culture more fully than ever before. He also recognized that his actions had consequences not only for himself, but for Earth as well. The delicate negotiations for peace now had a personal dimension he had not anticipated. Daniel began to reflect on his own feelings. He had come to admire Liara, not just as a leader, but as a person. Her intelligence, patience, and wisdom had left a deep impression on him. He realized that despite the unexpected circumstances, he respected and even liked her. Yet he was also aware of the responsibilities and expectations that now rested on his shoulders. Any decision he made would affect not only his own life, but the relationship between two worlds. It was a weight he had never imagined carrying, and he felt the pressure keenly. Meanwhile, the advisors of the Xylar watched closely. Some were skeptical of Daniel, questioning whether an outsider could truly honor their traditions. Others were intrigued, noting his sincere effort to learn and participate fully. Daniel knew that he had to demonstrate not just skill and intelligence, but also patience, humility, and the ability to adapt. Every action he took was now part of a larger story, one that could influence the future of interstellar relations and his own personal destiny. In the midst of this tension, moments of connection between Daniel and Liara became increasingly important. They shared conversations in quiet corners of the palace, away from the formalities and expectations of the court. Liara spoke of her hopes for peace, her vision for her people, and the challenges of leadership. Daniel shared stories of Earth, of humanity's struggles and triumphs, and of his own experiences as a diplomat. In these exchanges, they found understanding and a shared sense of purpose. The connection was no longer just professional. It had begun to include mutual respect and genuine friendship. Yet the unpredictability of Xylar tradition meant that even these personal moments were tinged with complexity. Each conversation, each gesture was observed carefully by advisors and courtiers. Daniel had to balance honesty with discretion, openness with prudence. He could not act recklessly, but he also could not hide his sincerity. It was a delicate dance, one that tested his patience and judgment at every turn. He learned that true diplomacy required more than negotiation skills. It demanded emotional intelligence, empathy, and an understanding of the subtleties of culture, and human, or in this case alien, behavior. One day, during another ceremonial event, Daniel was asked to participate in a different ritual, one that symbolized trust and partnership. This time he approached with awareness, guided by his previous experiences and Liara's quiet encouragement. He executed the ritual carefully, observing every detail, and felt a sense of accomplishment when it was completed successfully. Liara's approving smile reassured him, and he realized that he was growing into a role he had never anticipated, a role that combined diplomacy, cultural understanding, and personal commitment. As the days turned into weeks, Daniel began to accept the reality of his situation. The unexpected bond formed through the ceremonial ritual was now a part of his life, intertwined with his mission to negotiate peace. He recognized that the connection with Liara was unique, built on mutual respect, trust, and understanding. The circumstances had been unexpected, but they had also opened a door to a deeper partnership, one that could strengthen not only the bond between him and Liara, but also the relationship between their two worlds. By the end of this period, Daniel had changed in ways he could not have imagined. He had faced misunderstandings, learned to navigate complex customs, and gained a profound understanding of the Xylar people. Most importantly, he had begun to see Liara not just as a leader or a figurehead, but as a person with her own thoughts, values, and emotions. Their relationship, though unexpected, had become central to his mission and to his understanding of what it meant to connect across worlds. Daniel knew that the path ahead would continue to challenge him. The bond with Liara was now undeniable, and he would need to balance duty, diplomacy, and personal connection carefully. But for the first time, he also felt a sense of possibility, an awareness that even in a world so different from his own, trust, respect, and even affection could emerge. The unexpected twist of fate had reshaped his mission, turning what began as a task of negotiation into a journey of discovery, understanding, and connection that could change his life forever. Daniel awoke that morning with a quiet sense of purpose. The events of the past weeks had reshaped his mission, his role, and even his understanding of life itself. What had begun as a diplomatic assignment to negotiate peace with the Xylar had evolved into a journey of discovery, trust, and unexpected connection. The bond formed with Princess Liara was now undeniable, and Daniel realized that his personal feelings and professional responsibilities were intertwined in ways he could never have imagined. He spent the morning walking through the palace gardens, which floated above the crystalline city like suspended islands of light. The soft glow of the plants illuminated the paths, and the gentle hum of the environment created a sense of calm. Daniel reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He thought of the early days of tension, the ceremonial mistakes, the lessons in humility, and the moments of understanding that had gradually built a bridge between two very different worlds. He recognized that he had grown, not just as a diplomat, but as a person capable of empathy, patience, and genuine connection. Liara joined him in the gardens, moving with the same grace and poise that had captivated him from the start. She spoke of the responsibilities of leadership, of the hopes she held for her people, and of her desire for lasting peace between their worlds. Daniel listened, understanding that their partnership was now as much about collaboration as it was about diplomacy. Together, they discussed plans for cultural exchange, trade agreements, and educational programs that would allow humans in Xylar to learn from one another. Every idea they shared reflected a combination of their perspectives, blending the best of two civilizations into a vision of harmony. The ceremony that had once seemed intimidating now felt different. Daniel understood its significance fully, not only as a cultural ritual but as a symbol of trust, respect, and commitment. He realized that the bond formed with Liara was more than a formality. It was a partnership that required dedication, understanding, and care. As they walked together, he felt a deep appreciation for her wisdom, her patience, and the way she balanced authority with empathy. Liara, in turn, observed Daniel's sincerity, his willingness to adapt, and his genuine respect for her people. Their connection had matured into something extraordinary, built on mutual admiration and trust. Over the next few days, Daniel took on a role that was both personal and professional. He participated in meetings with Xylar advisors, offering insights from Earth's perspective while learning to understand the values and priorities of this alien civilization. He became a bridge between worlds, demonstrating that humans could respect Xylar traditions while sharing their own culture. Each interaction reinforced the trust that had been established and strengthened the foundation for lasting peace. At the same time, Daniel continued to deepen his relationship with Liara, learning more about her hopes, fears, and dreams for her people. One evening, as the city glowed beneath them, Daniel and Liara shared a quiet moment on a balcony overlooking the shimmering rivers of light. They spoke of the journey that had brought them together, reflecting on the unexpected twists that had shaped their lives. Daniel admitted that he had never imagined arriving on this world and finding a connection so profound. Liara smiled, acknowledging the challenges and joys they had faced together. In that moment, Daniel understood that the mission had transformed him completely. What had begun as duty had evolved into a partnership grounded in respect, understanding, and something deeper, an unexpected companionship that transcended the boundaries of their worlds. As the formalities of their union became part of Xylar tradition, Daniel embraced the role with sincerity. He understood that being Liara's partner was not just about ceremony. It was about commitment, collaboration, and trust. He approached his duties with care, honoring both the responsibilities to his own people and the traditions of the Xylar. Through shared decisions, collaborative planning, and mutual respect, Daniel and Liara demonstrated that cooperation between humans and Xylar was not only possible, but essential. Their bond became a living example of what could be achieved when understanding and respect guided interactions across cultures. Daniel also continued to learn from Liara on a personal level. He observed the way she handled challenges, made decisions, and nurtured her people. He admired her ability to balance wisdom with compassion, and he felt inspired to bring those qualities into his own life. In turn, Liara learned from Daniel's perspective, gaining insights into human values, problem-solving methods, and the ways humans approached both challenges and celebrations. Together, they blended knowledge, culture, and experience, creating a partnership that was stronger than either could have imagined alone. The peace agreements they negotiated began to take shape, supported by the trust and connection that Daniel had built with Liara. Exchanges between Earth and the Xylar flourished, with scientists, educators, and artists visiting each other's worlds. Daniel watched with satisfaction as the first human delegation stepped onto Xylar soil, greeted warmly by their hosts. He recognized that the mission's success was not solely due to treaties or paperwork. It was the result of understanding, respect, and the genuine human connection he had nurtured with Liara. What had begun as a task of diplomacy had blossomed into an interstellar partnership that promised to last generations. In private moments, Daniel reflected on the personal journey he had undertaken. He thought about the uncertainty, the mistakes, the lessons, and the moments of growth. He realized that the mission had changed him more than he could have imagined. He had arrived expecting to negotiate, He had discovered understanding, trust, and companionship. He had learned the power of humility, patience, and empathy, and he had found in Liara a partner whose values, wisdom, and presence had transformed his life. The unexpected union that had initially caused anxiety now filled him with purpose and fulfillment. As time passed, Daniel embraced his new life fully. He continued his diplomatic work with confidence, supported by Liara and guided by the lessons he had learned. He participated in ceremonies, attended meetings, and shared insights, all while nurturing the unique bond that had grown between him and Liara. Together they demonstrated that even across vast differences in culture, species, and tradition, connection, respect, and understanding could create harmony. The story of Daniel Hayes and Princess Liara concluded not with an ending, but with a beginning, a life filled with shared purpose, interstellar collaboration, and mutual growth. Daniel often thought about the journey that had brought him here, the fear and excitement of the first encounter, the challenges of understanding an alien culture, the unexpected twists of tradition, and the moments of connection that had reshaped his mission. He realized that life was unpredictable, that true understanding required openness and courage, and that sometimes the most extraordinary experiences emerged from the most unexpected circumstances. In the end, Daniel embraced the truth of his experience. What had started as a diplomatic mission had become a journey of personal and professional transformation. He had not only helped secure peace between worlds, but had also discovered a connection that transcended species, culture, and expectation. He had become more than a diplomat. He had become a partner, a bridge, and a friend. And through this unexpected journey, he learned that life, like the universe itself, held possibilities beyond imagination, possibilities that could change not only the course of history but the course of a single human heart.